All right, good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone. Thanks so much for attending yet another episode of UPtime. I'm Jeff Fisher, VP of Strategic Alliances here at KEMP, joined today by our good friend Jason Dover, Director of Product Line Management, who is back on again a year later to talk about our continued positioning in the Gartner Magic Quadrant. And we're excited that we've been positioned as a visionary for the second year in a row. There's also a new companion report that Jason will talk about, but we'll save that for later for his section for him to elaborate on. We've been on a bit of a break here due to the summertime. We didn't have UPtime in August. And we were going to have one in September, but it didn't work out. We are still waiting for a special episode for you guys that we're doing with the Dell Asia Pac team. As many of you probably know, we had a landmark deal that we closed there this year with you guys. It's the largest deal in KEMP history with the Australian Department of Defense. And we are going to be recording soon a session with the lead consultant on the Dell side from that project, who's going to take us through the details of the deal, how it came to be, how KEMP was positioned there, and how we ultimately ended up doing $1 million+ deal just on the KEMP side alone. Obviously part of a very, very large, much larger deployment of Microsoft Unified Communications across, I believe, several hundred deployments. So stay tuned for that. But for today, we are coming to you live from our new headquarters here in Times Square in Manhattan. We moved very recently from Rockefeller Center and are really enjoying our new digs. I guess the good news is that we've got double pane glass here, so hopefully we won't be interrupted today by the traditional sirens and other noises, although before we started the call, there actually was a siren here, which I could hear from the street. So it's not perfect, but certainly much better. So before we turn things over to Jason, we'll do some quick partnership updates. And then we will take a deeper dive look into the new Gartner reports. So a couple of updates here. This one is from at the request of Noemi, who runs channel marketing for us here in the U.S. and who many of you at Dell probably know. She asked me to do a plug for what we call Tech Tuesday, which is a set of content that is up and available to KEMP partners. It's password protected, so take a note of not only the URL there, but also of the credentials. And essentially what we do is we put up a series of videos that basically take you, our partners, through specific aspects of the products, our solutions, competitive landscape, not unlike what we'll do today with the Gartner content. And we've got a great series of content, covering things like our web application firewall, for example. I saw that there was actually a recent one on our federal joint business together. We'll actually talk about one of the large federal deals that we just recently did here in the U.S. together. So highly recommended. Noemi and team put a lot of work into creating the content, so you should get the benefit out of that. And I highly encourage you to bookmark that and check in, at least once a month to see what new content's available. The second update comes to you directly from Microsoft Ignite, where myself, Jason, Bargov, and a couple of other KEMPers were last week in Atlanta. Obviously, that's Microsoft's annual user, I would call it a conference. It's really a mega show at this point. is the consolidation of several different shows that they put together. It's just massive. We're still digesting it. We'll be providing updates through social media. I actually recorded a brief video down there talking about what it is that we were doing. But I would say for me, if you follow me on Twitter or LinkedIn, you'll see that I've been just providing a nonstop stream of Azure Stack updates. I guess people could call me maybe a bit of an Azure Stack maniac, but it's something that I've been tracking since it was announced. And in fact, I remember now that Microsoft actually announced Azure Stack in 2014 before they released the first set of technology preview code back in this January. We essentially here at KEMP just jumped on it. Mainly because of the fact that we so strongly believe in our value add for hybrid cloud, and it was really great finally to see it come from being something positioned as preview and maybe something that was just not really tangible because we hadn't seen a lot from Microsoft, and to see Dell as well as HP and Lenovo, who are the two other OEMs that are going to be releasing product in the middle of 2017 in the first wave, see all these units and this hardware on stage, and to see the entire Azure Stack team, providing tremendous amount of content, sessions, keynotes, and so on and so forth is really amazing. We, in fact, have been working pretty closely with a couple of members of your hybrid cloud solution team, who are the folks who own the actual hyper-converged appliances that Azure Stack will run on. And in fact, the way it's working now to make it really more accessible to a larger number of end users, the minimum requirements are relatively small. It's 4 nodes, which is about 400 VMs. Compared to the traditional or the original Microsoft cloud platform system, which was like 4 racks on several $1 million. So, this is really going to be accessible to a much wider range of customers. We see a tremendous role for our virtual load masters running both inside Azure Stack to do traditional local traffic management, but also to do global traffic management between Azure Stack and, say, the Azure public cloud. So we're really excited. We've got a demo up and running online on YouTube that's been really popular, very, very well received. So if you're interested in this area and you're looking at developing solutions and or your customer base, I would strongly suggest that you get yourself up to speed on Azure Stack and keep an eye on what KEMP is doing in this area. And then last but not least, I alluded to the fact that we've been doing some substantial federal business together here in the U.S. Due to the hard work on our side from Jim Justice and Mike Bamba, who are our federal folks, and have been working for years to really build this business, and have now really gotten to a great point with Dell Federal in terms of bringing deals to Dell Federal, and now having the Dell Federal team bring deals to them and us. And it's really sort of, I think, a poster child example of how we could be working and should be working better together on larger deals, let's say with Global 500 accounts. So this is just one example. It's the Department of Justice. I believe it's a civil division, a $250,000 KEMP deal, which is obviously pretty substantial. Again, always part of a larger Dell deal and a larger project for the customer, probably deploying, likely Exchange or Skype for Business or a combination, SharePoint, maybe some web services and or websites. In this case, we sold several Loadmaster 5305 FIPS editions. Again, for folks who are not in the federal business, those are specific federal requirements for non-military agencies of the federal government, We have been doing a tremendous amount of work through Jason's team, getting up to speed on that. In fact, I think now Mike loves to talk about the fact that we're the only FIPS certified virtual ADC in the marketplace. Is that correct?
Yeah, for level 1.
Great. So again, this was just a perfect opportunity to work together. Sort of a typical story that, if you've attended Uptimes and have been tracking us in the past, the F5 was quoted, in this case by Dell, and the pricing was way out of line in terms of what the customer was budgeted for, came in, offered KEMP as an alternative. And not only was Dell successful in positioning that, but the pricing was so good, we ended up selling more load balancers together. Not only that, because of the project registration, the Dell sales team, federal sales team, was able to get 30% off of MSRP. So again, I think this is just another example of the fact that there's tons of business for us to go after together. Certainly large budgets in government, but equally large budgets in G500. And we've got teams that are ready, willing, and able to work with you guys. They know how to do the positioning competitively against F5, Citrix, and others. And just a great opportunity for Dell to come in with what we would say is the smarter solution. Let's skip the step of actually quoting the competitors, and let's just have you guys quote KEMP begin with, and really delight the customer from the get-go. So looking forward to doing more like this, and also getting you guys information again about the federal deal, the Department of Defense deal that we did together in Australia. So that's really it from me in terms of updates, which leads us to the meat of the session here. Talking about the Gartner content, and again, we're super excited not only because of the fact that we've moved up and to the right, which is what you want to do on a Magic Quadrant, but also because we've been in the Visionary Quadrant now for the second year in a row, and also very excited to talk to you about the critical capabilities companion research that Gartner has released to really try to make, I think, the Magic Quadrant content a little more practical and usable for folks who are actually doing detailed evaluations of products, who have very specific requirements, use cases, and want to know more than just company A is positioned as a leader. They need to really sort of get into the nitty-gritty of it. So we've invited Jason back to take us through this. And before we actually get into the reports, what I asked them to do was just sort of take us through a quick Gartner primer. I think most people know what the Magic Quadrants are. They probably have not heard of critical capabilities. And if you actually read this stuff, then you also have to know what Mode 1 and Mode 2 are. And, other than being some options in a video game or maybe some select in your car, I certainly didn't know before Jason schooled me. So welcome to Uptime, Jason. Great to have you back.
Hey, thanks a lot, Jeff. Yeah, it's been a while, so happy to be back here today. Like you mentioned, I think most folks probably are familiar with Gartner at some level. Obviously, they're one of the largest and even the most renowned technology analyst firms, and we work with them quite a bit. And running products here at KEMP, we get a lot of value because they're looking closely at what the trends are that's happening in the market. They're talking to other vendors, they're talking to partners, they're talking to customers, and helping us understand how the trends that are happening are actually impacting the way that people are using technology to drive their businesses forward. It really just gives you kind of a sample selection of what customers really believe, because while they work with tech vendors like us, a big part of their customer base is with actual enterprise customers. And so that's very helpful from us. Obviously, also being in the Magic Quadrant, as you mentioned, and up and to the right and going in that direction, it does just provide a level of confidence for customers that are reviewing this data as well. Like you mentioned, there's been two research documents that were put out this year for the application delivery controller market, one being the Magic Quadrant, And the Magic Quadrant looks at a variety of vendors in the space, and based on their vision, right, the completeness of the vision that they have, as well as their ability to impact trends that are happening in the market and their ability to execute on that. That's what places a vendor in either the leaders quadrant, the visionaries quadrant, niche, or challengers. For us, we're in the visionaries quadrant, and from a definition point of view, a big part of what drives that is that you're bringing things to the market early enough, and you have a complete enough vision on it that Gartner believes that you can actually impact what's going to happen in the future. So we were obviously at the forefront of a number of things. You can just look at virtualized ADCs optimized for running in private cloud environments. While all vendors, or the majority of vendors have that today, we were actually one of the first. And not just one of the first to have it, but one of the first to proactively promote people in that direction, help customers to see that you don't have to go with proprietary vendor silicon from some of the other players in our space. You can use x86 hardware and a hypervisor and get the same level of performance and capabilities. Or you can look at SDN, right? Really being the first and still the only vendor that has what we call SDN adaptive load balancing, where we can consume SDN metrics from an SDN controller and leverage that in our decision-making algorithm. So we've been at the forefront of a number of innovations, and that's a big driver to getting into that visionary quadrant. But what keeps you in the visionary and maybe not in the leaders is size in some cases, right? So it's really proving that you can execute, which we've been doing for the last few years, and we're sure we'll continue to go in that trajectory. Like you mentioned, the second document that they've now produced for the application delivery controller market is critical capabilities. And it's a research piece that they've had for a number of other different spaces, but this is the first time that they've released it for the ADC market. And it's really meant to be used together. If you actually take a look on the Gartner portal, they're very closely linked, and they actually have interactive versions of those documents, and you can kind of traverse back and forth between the two because they're meant to complement one another. The CC, as they abbreviate and call it, is interesting because what it's meant to do is to help folks that are using it to see how a vendor maps to specific use cases, right? Because it's very easy for someone to say, okay, well, this vendor is closer to the right, or this vendor is further to the top, or further to the left, and I'm going to make my decision just solely on that. The idea that they've had around the critical capabilities is just to add a different dimension, and because it's not just black and white. It's to say, okay, well, yeah, here's the placement, but this vendor actually excels in this specific area. So it kind of uncovers a bit of their thinking and how they've positioned different vendors, and we're pretty happy about that. You mentioned as well a concept of bimodal IP, which is an interesting one in mode 1, mode 2. It's something that Gartner is really propelling, but I'm starting to hear that phraseology as I engage with analysts and editors seems to get a bit more popular, at least in that space. But the idea here really is that enterprise customers are looking at ways to leverage new and emerging technologies to allow their businesses to be more agile, to transition to a more on-demand SaaS-like model, right? And there are technologies that lend themselves to that, right? That can allow them to do that, but you still have the kind of day-to-day business that needs to be maintained. It may need to be maintained with existing traditional, you could call it quote-unquote legacy technologies that you've already had in place. But what Gartner is basically saying is that there's not an easy way to just flip a switch and transition. You may, I know customers that still have mainframes as an example, and they're just now going to figure out, well, how do we get to a point where we can modernize our data center and virtualize it, right? There's the concept of treating components and parts of your infrastructure like a museum, right? Where you have to curate things and you can't touch it and you have to be very careful and it just stays there forever. But with things, let's say like containerization, where life is a lot more ephemeral, right? You're treating it much more like a factory. You have a conveyor belt that has a roller on it. That roller has a lifetime. You toss it out, you don't care about it. And that's kind of the difference between mode 1 and mode 2. So traditional storage architectures might be seen as mode 1, where it's software-defined storage. could potentially be seen as mode containers as an example. And that's a big part that you will see permeate through all of Gartner research these days, is how do you as an enterprise start taking advantage of emerging technologies from vendors and using that to help transform your business. But how do you balance that with the business requirements and systems that may just have an intrinsic need for traditional architectures that you have? And as they're looking at vendors, they're saying, okay, which vendors exist in the market that put together solutions that allow you to do both? Because you can't just flip a light switch, and it's much more. It could be much more convenient to have solutions that allow you to serve both than have to double your infrastructure, double the technology that you have to deal with separately. And just as you read Gartner research, you'll see that language around bimodal IT and mode 1 and mode 2 kind of permeating throughout it.
Perfect, great. A couple of thoughts. So Vijay Tiwari, who runs the Azure Stack product team at Microsoft, has a great term that he used for the legacy workloads, that they're now called heritage workloads and heritage technology. So I thought that was funny. But I would say, this almost points toward some of the research that Jeffrey Moore writes about in one of the books I have back here on my strategy, in my strategy library, Escape Velocity, where he talks about the thinking man's decision, in terms of the way, market leaders and then sort of tier 1 vendors versus tier 2. And I would say, we have two distinct advantages. Everyone thinks, size is best. Who's going to pick, like you said, the person who's up and to the right. And they could really be there because of the fact that they were, early in the market and market leader, and they've grown so large. I don't think that's necessarily an advantage, right, after a market has progressed past a certain point, because it very often makes those vendors very difficult to deal with, right? And I think if we've proven anything, especially with our relationship with Dell, is that we're agile, we're responsive, we're easy to work with, and that's one piece. And then I would say, along those lines, we prove that through the actions that we've taken, around being visionary, whether it's on the end front or on leveraging, the x86 hardware, which I think, again, has been a great development for our relationship with Dell. Now leveraging more and more Dell hardware, and proving that, KEMP, load balancer operating system running on top of a Dell server can perform, for most, general use case customers, just as well as anything else in the marketplace. So some great insights there.
Absolutely. Go to the next slide. So here we have actually a snapshot of this year's Magic Quadrant, and as you can see, a number of the points that we kind of alluded to already, but our pricing model, our flexible consumption model, especially for, let's say, hosted private cloud environments, we've introduced a number of new licensing approaches that managed service providers can leverage, whether it's per seat licensing, whether it's based on actual amount of consumption. Right. The point is, as people are moving to more of these elastic models, there's a requirement for billing, consumption, and licensing approaches that make sense for those type of operating environments. And that was one of the strengths that was highlighted there. Equally, we released a DevOps-focused version of our product that can also run on all platforms. The idea is there is to get into the continuous integration process that certain enterprises are starting to adopt by virtue of being involved in a part of the solution as it's being developed, as it's being QA'd and tested. We're then top of mind when the customer now moves over to actual production, and we're on a run rate of around 400 to 500 activations of our free virtual load master product to date. So that's definitely been a big help for us. Again, it's really about looking at how are people doing computing today, and how can we build models and solutions that kind of resonate with that. And obviously with that, we're now building more and more of a community, more recipes and more ways that can help people to get to the value of our offering as quickly as possible. like we mentioned as well, you can see they do try to show both sides of the coin, right? So the cautions there, and a lot of those are related to perceived perceptions as it pertains to size and reach. But even as you mentioned, working with Dell, who's of course one of our largest partners and others similar, that does help us with that reach. And it's interesting, when I came here, I come from working in Fortune 500 fintech enterprise. This was one of the smallest global companies that I ever worked for, with offices throughout Europe and Asia Pacific as well as US. I think I was about the 65th employee. A few months later, I hired the 100th employee. And of course, we're hovering around 200 now. So smallest global company that I've ever worked on. What you mentioned too about the size and agility being an advantage is just how quickly we can iterate. So you'll note here there's a bullet about a lack of SAML capabilities for web authentication. So when we are actually, when this was released, we were already running a live beta for our SAML capabilities with plans to GA on that in the next release of our Loadmaster operating system. So yeah, we think it's a very fair and accurate description of how KEMP has been performing and what our impact will be in the market.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I would say, so the interesting, the final caution, building a community, as you mentioned, the availability of skills specific to us is maybe not as prevalent as, obviously, F5 as an example, and perhaps Citrix. Although I would have to say, and we hear this time and time again, we heard it at Ignite, we hear it just about every time we engage with Dell Consulting or Pro Support. People are just literally, I mean, the word is mesmerized by how simple it is to use our products, right? So, and it's no small feat, to take something that's as complex as application delivery technology and what an ADC does, and really boil it down to a UI that's very user-friendly and intuitive. And I think that that's a huge plus because, like I always like to say, no one sort of, wakes up in the morning in IT, whether they're on the consulting side, vendor side, or the actual customer side, says, oh, I want to become an ADC, right? No, they wake up and they have a role to be the Active Directory person, to be the Exchange person, to be the web service person, now, like you said, to be the container guy or gal, and they come across a scenario where they need high availability, they need a third-party product. The last thing they want to do is divert all of their time to then learning how to deploy some very cumbersome, overwhelming system, and or as a customer say, hey, there's no way this is going to happen, so now I'm going to have to pay top dollar to have some expert come in here. So again, yes, you can look at these through both lenses, and of course I'm biased, but I think that's a huge, huge advantage for us, right? And so maybe, part of the reason that we don't have a series of, or, masses of experts is because you don't actually have to do that for to operate our product.
Yeah, I remember we had the Exchange MVPs that did a video a bit ago, and it was, deploying and configuring Loadmaster in 10 minutes. So it's kind of straightforward.
Right.
We get a lot of commentary on it.
Great. Well, this is, this is sort of, key for everyone to understand. And again, obviously the point here is to help you guys understand how to position this with your customers. And we'll certainly talk before we close out about, what's available, how you can get access to this, and most importantly, how you can get your customers access. So they're making, at the point of trying to make a decision and work with you.
No, absolutely. I mean, even our internal sales team found this quite useful in leveraging in sales opportunities, right? And it's interesting because it can be leveraged at multiple parts of the sales cycle, sometimes just at the introduction, right? Because like you mentioned, we already, I think, both said F5 a couple times right there, that they are the 500-pound gorilla that people are comparing solutions against, right? So being able to provide some clarity on how we are positioned and how the market views us as it compares to them is very helpful at that early kind of education part. But equally, as you get along, right, where maybe with some of the more mid-tier vendors, where the question is more as it pertains to, let's say, pricing or more particulars of how you solve something versus someone else, this research also is helpful in providing comfort and confidence for the customer, and especially as you think about the critical capabilities research as well.
Yeah.
probably could segue there. Yeah, so critical capabilities, like we mentioned, the focus of this research is then to give a different angle to what Gartner's providing and basically take common scenarios and use cases that they're seeing in the market that they've validated with their enterprise customers and say, okay, well, how do the individual vendors stack up in terms of satisfying that? And something that we're especially proud of is that we were the only vendor to rank in the top 6 of all of the 6 use cases. We were ranked first for mid-market use cases, and we ranked second for mode 1, mode 2 hybrid use case. And that latter one, like we talked about earlier, which is really about customers that are trying to do a bit of both. They have your traditional mode 1 applications, think of them like those museum artifacts, and then you've got those mode 2 use cases where they're trying to explore, maybe they're breaking out a part of their network and introducing SDN concepts that ring the network in different ways. Well, we have capabilities there. They're looking to leverage OpenStack as an example, and they need LBAS, a plugin for work that they're doing there. And do have a containerized version now of our product, and being able to help customers on both fronts, again, gives them or instills confidence that we can go with them on the journey to data center modernization, whatever that looks like for them, whether they're building their own private cloud, whether they're working with partners, they're using, as you mentioned, Azure Stack and x86 architecture to provide hosted cloud. But the fact that we can basically span both sides of that is what helped us to get this type of positioning in this research as well.
Perfect. Yeah, no, this is great. And again, I think this really fills in that gap of, sort of the bookends of the sales process and the sales cycle, right? So there's the beginning of it where, very often we do, and I'm sure people at KEMP, at Dell rather, who are positioning KEMP, get from the customer, well, who's KEMP, right? And the Magic Quadrant is always a great way of saying, here's who KEMP is, right? And it does provide at least enough, detail from the Gartner side to say, okay, we just didn't stick them, here because that's what we thought. Here's some thinking behind that. I think the critical capabilities is awesome when you get further into the sales cycle. Okay, now I know that Gartner considers KEMP a visionary. They've been around for a while. They know what they're doing. Now let's get further into the RFP, whatever it is, process and talk about very, very specific use cases. We're using it to deploy this kind of a workload. We need this kind of a feature or capability or a set of features and capabilities. And it's great to have now specific research from Gartner that gets more granular, right? So you can work through that piece, and it's not just relying on, in the case of Dell, they would be leaning on, us as the vendor, and of course, the vendor is always going to say, oh yeah, we can do that, right? Especially that's our mantra here. But it's nice to have a third party who can validate that and say, yeah, in this area, KEMP's a great fit. So it's nice to be able to leverage this Gartner research and different pieces of it throughout the sales cycle.
That's a good point. The MQ kind of answers the who, while the CC kind of answers the why for me, right? Because it's looking at your specific use case, and obviously the whole document has a lot deeper definitions and explanations on each of the areas and how each of the vendors kind of maps up. So this kind of answers that next question, and how you have third-party validated tools that can be leveraged seamlessly throughout the entire sales cycle.
Perfect. Well, I forgot to mention this earlier, but of course, as always, please feel free to ask questions. We don't get Jason off and on, and he's really, as you can tell, spent a ton of time, developing our relationship with Gartner, working very, very closely with their networking team that covers ADCs there. And so I'm sure he'd be happy to answer your questions. So, feel free to, either, unmute yourself and answer over the audio, or if you want to put something in the chat window, the IM window, we're happy to do that. Yeah, I mean, that's really it in a nutshell, right? We wanted to make sure that you guys were aware of this, how to leverage it, how to use it for your prospects and your customers, and maybe as some questions are brewing, I guess we'll we'll talk about the fact that these have been posted now for about a month on our website. They're available for download either for yourselves or for your customers. I would say probably on behalf of Jason that we would try to encourage you to get your prospects and others to go independently to download this, because it's a critical source of lead generation for us. We spend a substantial amount of money buying reprint rights for these. It's a very, very short form, just a couple of bits of information. From this link, you can essentially go and get the MQ and the CC. So, awesome. Yeah, I think that's about it. So again, sort of last call here for questions, if there are any. If not, then we'll thank everybody for attending today. We know there's been a little bit of a break here, but we're glad to be back, especially here in our great new offices. We're actually overlooking not Times Square, but 6th Avenue. It's a beautiful day here in Manhattan. Like I said, we're already in the process of working on some additional content for you guys. I think everyone is going to really enjoy hearing about the Australian Department of Defense deal, not only because of the size and scale, but also because of the fact that it really sort of hones in on some very unique capabilities that KEMP has, which is really why we won the deal. Around some licensing and our ability to do large-scale offline licensing for discrete deployments that are not, in this case, connected to the internet, which we'll talk more about, and also our automated deployment capabilities through our pretty extensive support for API, PowerShell, and other automation tools. So it doesn't look like there are any questions here, Perry, unless I'm missing something. So if not, until next time, always value your input. If you've got ideas for tech talk or biz talk topics, things you'd like us to talk about, please let us know. We'd be more than happy to consider them. Bring on the right experts. We love guest speakers, especially from the Dell side, to talk about real-world scenarios in which KEMP was able to come in and provide value to Dell customers. And to work with Dell sales and consulting and support teams. Always love to hear about joint customer wins. We do a lot of business together. We're on track this year to do a record amount of business, substantial growth over 2015. So that's always good news. And anything else you have on your mind in terms of the format or what we could be doing differently or better, we'd be happy to hear you. Sincere thanks to Jason for joining today. I think it's always great, and it's great to hear it directly from the person who's really been the mastermind behind this effort. And again, if you've got questions for Jason and you're running and you want to shoot those via email to me, I'll make sure that we get them to him and we get your response.
Thanks a lot, Jeff.
You got it. Thank you. Thanks to everyone for joining. We'll see you guys next time.
Bye-bye.